What happens when the quiet one in the family, the one everyone overlooks, turns out to be the only one holding the truth? They thought he'd stay silent forever. They laughed when he brought a homemade pie to a rooftop fundraiser. They tried to erase him from his father's will, but what they didn't know was that he had the one document that could destroy everything they built. What would you do if your own brother tried to steal your inheritance right out from under you? Let me tell you a story. My name is Eli Granger. I'm 45 years old, single, and work as a farm equipment technician in Eugene, Oregon. I fix irrigation pumps, tune up balers, patch broken fencing. It's not glamorous work, but it's steady, and it makes sense to me. Things break. I fix them. Simple. A few weeks ago, my mom called. Her voice was warm, overly so, like a pot left simmering just a bit too long. "Eli," she said, "Asher's hosting a fundraiser for his new resort project. It's a rooftop thing in downtown Portland. You should come." I hesitated. I could already hear the suit jackets, clinking glasses, the polite laughter, the faint sense of superiority radiating from catered shrimp towers. "It would mean a lot to your brother," she added. That part stung, the way she said Ida as if I hadn't been showing up my whole life. Still, I went. I baked an apple pie the way Dad used, thick crust, cinnamon heavy, with honey drizzled on top. It was his favorite, and somehow, it felt like the most honest thing I could bring. I washed up after work, put on my cleanest plaid shirt, and made the 2-hour drive north. The elevator opened onto the rooftop just as the sun was starting to dip. String lights flickered, jazz hummed from somewhere invisible, and the skyline of Portland glowed like a brochure. Everyone there looked expensive. Silk dresses, polished shoes, voices pitched low with confidence. I walked in holding the pie, not sure what to do with my hands. Then I saw her, Valerie, Asher's wife, standing by the wine bar, her back to me. I walked over. She turned, spotted me, and without missing a beat, said just loud enough, "Oh look, the repair guy brought dessert." There was a beat of laughter, not loud, but sharp. I stood there, pie in hand, feeling like a misplaced delivery man. I forced a smile. "Hi Val, it's Eli, Asher's brother." Her smile thinned. "Of course. Sorry, I just wasn't expecting you." Asher approached with a glass of something sparkling, hair too perfect, eyes too tired to pretend. "Eli, didn't think you'd actually come." I said I would. He nodded at the pie. "That's thoughtful." That word again. Thoughtful. Like a child's drawing hung on a corporate fridge. Mom was near the balcony, talking to some neighbors from back in Florence. I gave a small wave. She returned a polite smile, the kind you give a helpful cashier, then turned back. I placed the pie at the edge of the buffet, next to a tower of macarons. Then I found an empty spot by the railing, watching the city I didn't belong to shimmer in the glass below. Someone asked Asher who I was. "Oh, that's just Eli," he replied. "He works on tractors. Real solid guy. Just Eli." I stayed 10 minutes longer. No one stopped me when I turned to leave. But just before the elevator doors closed, Asher stepped inside with me. We stood in silence as the floors ticked down. Then he said it, quiet, like it was nothing. "Mom's thinking about selling the Donner Lake property. Not much use for it these days." I turned to him. "The ranch? Dad's ranch?" He shrugged. "It's just land, Eli. It's not doing anything." I didn't reply. I just stepped out into the parking garage. And that's when I knew this wasn't about a fundraiser. It wasn't about family. It was about forgetting, about erasing, about moving on without looking back. But I wasn't ready to let go. The drive back from Portland felt longer than usual. It wasn't the traffic or the distance, it was something heavier. I kept replaying Valerie's voice in my head, that mocking lilt. "Oh look, the repair guy brought dessert," and Asher's casual dismissal. "It's just land. To them, maybe." But not to me. Lake Donner wasn't just land, it was memory, labor, and something close to sacred. My dad bought it in 1987, back when timber was still Oregon's heartbeat. The ranch wasn't big, but it had everything. Pine groves, a crumbling dock, a crooked cabin that smelled like sawdust and smoke. It was the place we spent summers splitting wood, catching bass, eating burnt hot dogs. It was the only place where I ever saw my father laugh with his whole face. I remember helping him rebuild the porch when I was 13. He let me hammer every third nail, even though I bent most of them sideways. He never yelled, just said, "You'll get it right if you're willing to get it wrong first." Years later, I dropped out of Oregon State during my sophomore year to come home. Dad had been diagnosed with colon cancer, and someone had to manage the place. Asher couldn't or wouldn't. He was already deep into his MBA program at Stanford, building something he called a scalable life. I stayed. For 7 years, I managed the ranch, drove Dad to chemo, paid bills with odd jobs, and watched him waste away 1 inch at a time. I cooked. I mowed. I held his hand when the tremors started. When he passed, I was the one who cleaned out the oxygen tanks and folded his flannel shirts. At the funeral, Asher delivered a eulogy filled with business metaphors. Dad was a cornerstone, a structural pillar. I stood at the back, hands in my pockets, and said nothing. I didn't need to. Grief sat too deep in my chest for words. After that, I stayed on the property, took a job in Eugene fixing farm machinery during the day, drove up every weekend to maintain the house, patch fences, keep it from collapsing into rot and memory. It became a rhythm, quiet, invisible work. And no one seemed to notice. Not Mom, not Asher, not anyone. When Mom mentioned the family trust last year, I didn't ask questions. She said Asher helped her streamline things, which I took to mean removing clutter, not history. She handed me a clean packet legal cold. I flipped through it once and nodded. I should have looked closer, but I didn't want to fight. I thought maybe peace was worth letting go of details. I was wrong. Asher called me once last winter, said he was thinking of utilizing the Donner property for a higher value purpose. His words. He mentioned cabins, event spaces, eco-retreats. Said he had investors. I told him flatly I didn't think Dad would have liked that. He laughed. "Eli, you're still living like it's 1995. Dad's gone. We have to be smart about things." That was the last time we spoke before the fundraiser. Now I sat at my kitchen table, the smell of the half-eaten pie still lingering in the room. I looked at the photo on the wall, me and Dad on the old rowboat, a string of fish between us. My cheeks were sunburnt, his eyes squinting from sunlight, not pain. I felt like a ghost in my own family. I'd given years, sacrificed time, sweat, even potential. And yet, in their eyes, I was still the afterthought, the backup plan, the guy who showed up with pie and didn't know how to wear a tie. I wasn't angry yet. Not fully. Not the kind of anger that burns. It was more of a quiet ache, the kind that makes you stare at walls for too long and forget your coffee's gone cold. Still, beneath all that sorrow, something small began to stir. A question. What if I wasn't wrong? What if Dad had seen this coming? He was always cautious, always scribbling notes, filing papers. Maybe, just maybe, left something behind. Not just memories or mottos, but something real. Something binding. I stood up, walked to the back closet, pulled down the old tin lockbox Dad kept under a pile of out-of-season coats. Inside were some receipts, a rusted flashlight, and a key. The key had a faded blue tag on it. Back in the barn, behind the grain bins, there was a cabinet I hadn't touched in years. The lock had long since rusted shut until now. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew I had to start. The next morning, fog hung low over the pasture, turning everything pale and quiet. I grabbed a crowbar, a thermos of coffee, and the key I'd found, then walked out to the barn. The cold air cut through my jacket as I pulled open the heavy doors. Dust rose like memory. That cabinet sat where it always had, tucked behind stacked lumber, under an old grain chart. I hadn't opened it since before Dad got sick. The lock resisted at first, then gave with a dry metallic snap. Inside were boxes, paper boxes, faded file folders stacked crooked. One labeled W2S, another Irrigation Maps 2001, a third simply read Personal, e.g. I pulled that one out. Inside was a blue binder, wrapped in wax paper. My breath caught. I remembered this. Dad used to keep it locked in his old office before the termites took the back wall. I'd seen him write in it late at night, by lamplight, careful and methodical. I used to think he was making a list of things to fix. I never asked. I opened it. Every page was labeled in tight, square handwriting, dates, deeds, bank statements, tax filings, all in blue ink. My name showed up more than once. I flipped through tabs until one stopped me cold. Lake Donner, succession clause. Filed April 2009. I blinked. My chest tightened as I read. If Eli Granger maintains residence at the Lake Donner property for a minimum of 10 consecutive years following the passing of Ernest Granger, the property consisting of 11.6 acres and all standing structures shall pass to him solely and in perpetuity, overriding any future revisions to the General Granger Trust unless expressly consented to by the residing heir. I read it 3 times, then a 4th. I hadn't just been living on Dad's land. I had fulfilled the clause, quietly, faithfully, for over a decade. But that clause hadn't been in the version Mom gave me last year. I remembered thinking something was off back then. The document felt too clean, like someone had washed away the details. But I hadn't pressed. I hadn't wanted to seem ungrateful or suspicious. Now I knew better. This wasn't forgetfulness. This wasn't streamlining. This was erasure. I took photos of every page, then carefully slid the binder back into its folder and placed it inside my truck cab. By noon, I was on the phone with Uncle Ray. He picked up on the second ring. "Eli," he said. His voice was slower now, but still solid. "Been a while. I found Dad's succession clause," I said. "Filed April 09, in his handwriting, in the blue binder." A long pause. "I was there when he had it drafted," Ray said. "Your dad was worried even back then that someone might try to cut corners. Said if you stayed, it should be yours. That was his condition. He never told me. Because he wanted you to live there because it meant something to you, not because of a paper trail." I leaned back against the truck door, heart pounding. Why wasn't it in the version Mom gave me? I imagine because Asher gave it to her. That landed like a gut punch. Ray continued. "Your dad asked me to back up the clause with someone legal, in case it ever came into question. You remember Carl Rhodes, his old lawyer? Still alive, far as I know. Retired now. Lives near Grants Pass." I hung up and stared at the wheel. Then I started driving. Carl Rhodes lived in a 1-story ranch home with faded green shutters and wind chimes made from spoon handles. His daughter answered the door and led me to the sunroom, where he sat beneath a wool blanket reading a Popular Mechanics from 2003. "Mr. Rhodes?" I said. He looked up, then squinted. "Well, I'll be," he murmured. "That's an Ernest Granger jawline if I ever saw one." I laughed, though my chest still felt tight. "I'm Eli, his son." "I remember," he said, pointing to the chair across from him. "You were what, 9, the day your dad stormed into my office yelling about timber zoning? That man never trusted paper without signatures." I laid the printed photos of the binder pages across the table. "I think my brother revised the trust documents," I said. "Remove this clause." Carl leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "This is his handwriting," he muttered. "And this clauseus, I remember it. We filed the original with the county clerk. He even notarized it with me present. Is it still valid?" If no signed revision was filed by all heirs and the one your mom signed didn't include this, then yes, this holds. I exhaled sharply. It was the first time in days I felt like I wasn't drowning. Carl looked at me with an expression somewhere between pity and respect. Your dad wanted you protected. He said, Eli might not talk much, but he does the work. The work should mean something. I nodded. I need to prove that this clause was deliberately hidden. Carl nodded slowly. Then you'll need more than this binder. He reached under the table, pulled out a cracked accordion folder, and laid it in front of me. Your dad gave me this the year he filed that clause. Told me to keep it until someone tried to bury his intentions. Inside were notarized copies, maps, even a land survey with coordinates drawn in blue ink. Every signature lined up. Dates were consistent, legally airtight. Carl leaned back. You've got a shot, Eli. Not just to protect the land, but to show them that silence doesn't mean surrender. I sat in my truck for a long time afterward, the binder beside me, the folder on my lap. This was no longer just about a property. It was about what a man's promise means when he's no longer here to defend it. My father had built something sturdy, lasting, and I'd been standing on it the whole time, too humble to believe it could hold. Until now, I got back to the cabin after dark. The headlights from my truck cut through the trees like tired eyes. I parked near the porch, engine ticking in the cold. For a long time, I just sat there, fingers still curled around the steering wheel like I'd been gripping something more than plastic. Inside, the air was still and old. The kind of silence that doesn't welcome you, it just reminds you how long it's been since someone cared if you were there. I dropped the binder and folder onto the kitchen table. They landed with a dull thud, like a truth too heavy to lift twice. I stood for a while, staring at the fireplace, unlit and full of ashes. Then I opened the cabinet and pulled out an old bottle of Dad's whiskey, the one we'd never finished. I poured an inch into a chipped mug, sat down and let the cold from the chair sink into me. For the first time in years, I let myself wonder something I had pushed away every time it tried to crawl in. Had my own mother known? Had she signed away that clause, knowing full well what it meant? I wanted to believe no. I needed to believe she'd been misled, confused, worn down by Asher's clean suits and confident words. But deep down, I couldn't forget the way she smiled at me that night on the rooftop light, distant, like I was someone else's son. That smile haunted me more than anything Asher ever said. I took a sip. It burned less than I expected. Maybe I was just too numb to feel it right. Upstairs, the floor creaked like an old voice clearing its throat. The walls carried the chill of October, and outside, the lake was still mirroring the moon like it had no interest in what was happening under its reflection. I leaned back, arms crossed, and stared at the photograph above the mantel. Me and Dad on the dock, holding a fishing pole too big for my 10-year-old hands. He was mid-laugh, his face lit by pride and sun. I did what you asked, I said quietly, voice breaking. I stayed, I kept it alive, but it didn't feel like enough. Not now. Because this wasn't just about land anymore. It was about what it meant to stay behind. To give up your 20s to illness. To rebuild rotten floorboards while your peers rebuilt startups. To become invisible inside your own family while the ones who left got statues and spotlights. I had done the work, and I had let them write me out anyway. I stared at my hands cracked, rough, stained from machines and wood stain in winters without enough heat. These hands had built fences, replaced roofs, buried my father, but they had never fought. Until now, I reached for the folder again, flipping through the documents like they were sacred. They were sacred. Not because of the ink or the law, but because someone believed enough in me to leave them behind. And then I saw it, tucked inside a side pocket I hadn't opened before a map. A hand-drawn survey of the property line, etched in blue pen, with Dad's initials in the corner. Scrawled in the margin, in the same handwriting I'd watched fill out tax returns and to-do lists for decades, were 7 words. If they forget you, show them the line. That's when it clicked. It wasn't just about protecting the land, it was about protecting me. Dad had known somewhere in the back of his tired, aching heart that the quiet son, the one who stayed, would be the one left behind. Unless he left a trail. And now, I was holding it. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. The coffee tasted like smoke. The wind cut across the lake sharp and clean, like a blade being honed. I put on my jacket, packed the binder, the map, and every copy Carl had given me into a box. I locked it. Then I locked the truck. This time, I wasn't driving in shame. I was going home with something my brother would never see coming. Proof. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. Not Mom, not Asher, not even Uncle Ray, especially not Asher. The meeting was already arranged Sunday dinner at Mom's house. A family update, she had called it. Probably another step in Asher's plan to ease me out of the picture. This time, though, I came prepared. I parked 3 houses down and walked the rest of the way, the October wind trailing behind me like a quiet ally. I carried a plain manila folder under my arm. Inside, the clause, the survey map, the notarized documents, everything. The porch looked the same as always faded welcome mat, crooked wind chime, the plastic goose still dressed for fall in a flannel scarf. My boots crunched on the dead leaves. When I knocked, the door opened before I could lower my hand. Asher, he gave me a smile that didn't touch his eyes. Eli, good you came. His tone was too calm, too polished. Like he'd rehearsed it. I stepped inside. The living room was full. Valerie sat in the corner with a glass of wine, legs crossed like a diplomat. Mom was on the couch, posture stiff, hands folded. And beside her, an envelope. Thick, official-looking. They'd been waiting. We thought, Valerie began, this would be a good time to talk about the cabin. Asher's project is moving forward, and we need clarity. I looked at the envelope, then back at her. I bet you do. Mom cleared her throat. We've drawn up an agreement. If you're open to compromise, you'd receive a buyout, fair market value, plus relocation assistance. Relocation assistance. Like I was some tenant overstaying his lease. A ghost they were finally ready to clear out. I didn't sit down. I didn't touch the coffee they offered. Instead, I pulled out my folder and laid it on the coffee table, next to theirs. You might want to read this first. Asher hesitated. Valerie gave him a sharp look. He opened it, flipped through, page after page. His face changed shade by shade, first confidence, then confusion, then the slow chill of recognition. The succession clause, he muttered. Filed in 2009, I said. Signed by Dad. Notarized. Recorded. Never revoked. Mom looked from him to me. But that's not the version I signed. No, I said. It's not, because the version you signed was edited. Either you didn't read it carefully, or someone didn't explain what was removed. Her face paled. A pause hung in the room like held breath. Valerie leaned forward, wine glass untouched. This doesn't change the fact that Asher's project is already underway. Permits are filed. Investors are involved. You can't just, I can, I said quietly. Because the land he's building on wasn't legally transferred. It's still mine. And then I pulled out the map, the one Dad had drawn by hand. The one that included the full Lake Donner boundary property line etched in blue ink, initials in the corner like a signature of intent. I unfolded it slowly, carefully, like a dealer laying down the final card. Asher stared at it, jaw clenched. You built your resort pitch on land you don't own, I said. And the moment I file this with the county clerk, which I plan to do tomorrow, those permits get flagged, and your investors start asking questions you can't answer. He stood suddenly, knocking the coffee table slightly. His voice trembled not from fear, but fury. You're gonna burn everything down over a patch of trees and a cabin nobody uses? I looked him in the eye. Number, I'm going to protect what Dad left behind. The part of him you couldn't monetize. Mom's eyes filled, but she didn't speak. She looked smaller than I remembered, frail under the weight of too many silences. Asher glared, lips tight. Valerie was already pulling out her phone, no doubt texting damage control. I gathered my documents slowly, tucking them back into the folder like a craftsman finishing his work. You don't have to like me, I said, voice steady. You don't even have to understand. But you will respect what he left, and you will not rewrite my place in this family. And with that, I turned to leave. Nobody followed. Outside, the wind had picked up. I walked down the porch steps, folder in hand, heart steady. The gravel crunched beneath my boots like applause from the earth itself. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a guest in my own bloodline. I felt like the one who remembered what mattered. By Monday morning, I was at the Lane County Recorder's office when the doors opened. The woman behind the desk took the documents, scanned them, stamped them, and handed me a receipt. That's it? I asked. She smiled. That's it. Legally recorded. It didn't feel dramatic. No gavel. No announcement. Just a quiet shift in weight, like the earth had tilted slightly in my favor. But the ripples started almost immediately. By Thursday, Asher's lead investor, a commercial developer out of Bend, pulled out. Then the article hit the local news. Family dispute halts Lake Donner Resort project. Legal ownership under question. They didn't even mention Asher by his full name in the second paragraph. By the following week, his permits were suspended pending review. Zoning was frozen. Local environmental groups got wind of it and began posting online, demanding the land be protected from development. I didn't even have to lift a finger for that part. Mom called me 3 days later. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't say much at all. I didn't know, Eli, she said, voice quiet. I believe you, I replied, and I mostly did. I should have read the papers more closely, she added. But he said it was all just cleaning up old language. He said it didn't change anything. I didn't say anything. I let the silence do the work. Eventually, she added, I'm staying out of this now. Whatever you decide to do with the cabin, it's your call. That was more than I expected. Valerie left Asher quietly, no drama, no announcements. One morning she was listed on the board of his company's website. The next morning she wasn't. My guess is she saw the writing on the wall. She always had good instincts for when the tide turned. Asher tried to salvage what he could, filed for mediation, had his attorney send me a settlement offer buyout, mutual non-disparagement, some nonsense about shared access. I fed it to the wood stove without reading past page 2. His name stopped showing up in local donor circles. A few speaking engagements disappeared from the calendar. Eventually, I heard he moved to Dallas, something about consulting. It sounded vague enough to be true. I didn't speak to him again. There wasn't anything left to say. Instead, I went back to the cabin. The land was still mine, but it had changed. Or maybe I had. I started clearing brush, repaired the back stairs, refinished the dock with lumber I hauled from a mill 2 towns over. It was good work, physical, repetitive, the kind that quiets your brain. A few weeks in, I found one of Dad's old toolboxes under the porch. Inside was his pocket watch, still ticking, wrapped in a rag. I held it in my hand for a long time. That man hadn't left me money. He left me a way back to myself. One weekend, a retired teacher I knew stopped by. She brought a pie and a folding chair. We talked on the porch for hours. The next weekend, she came back with a friend, an old machinist who'd just lost his wife. Then a few more folks. Then someone brought chili. The cabin started breathing again. That fall, a social worker from town asked if she could bring a few foster kids out for a day just to be in the woods, away from the noise. I didn't hesitate. I said yes. One of the boys, barely 15, asked if I had always lived here alone. I looked around. Porch swing creaking, coffee pot bubbling inside, laughter floating across the lake. Not anymore, I said. And I meant it. I mounted Dad's pocket watch in a small glass shadow box and hung it over the fireplace. Beneath it, a brass plaque with 7 simple words. If you're standing here, you made it. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like stillness, like choosing to stay when it would have been easier to leave, like picking up the pieces and building something not for applause, but because the work matters. The cabin isn't just mine anymore. It belongs to every person who's ever felt invisible in their own family, to the ones who stayed, who showed up, who did the work while others took credit. To anyone who was told, it's just land, and knew in their bones that it was more. Now, on most weekends, there's life here again. Campfires, laughter, people talking like they mean it. Sometimes quiet, sometimes rowdy, always honest. We host community dinners now. A grief group meets every other Saturday. And a few of those foster boys keep coming back not because they have to, but because it feels like something steady. And me? I'm still here. Porch light on, coffee on the stove, listening. If you've ever had to fight for something that should have been yours from the start, your place, your voice, your name, I want you to know. You're not alone. Drop your story in the comments. I'll read it. And if you want to hear more stories like this about quiet strength, about truth finally rising to the surface, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. No pressure. Either way, I'll be right here, waiting.